So I wanted to hop in. We played that Satterfield cut on the way back in here, and we've kind of heard from him a lot in the last week or so. He was on Sports Nightly last week, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we heard from him yesterday, and he seems a little different to me in terms of his demeanor than he was last year, and he seems genuinely excited to be back coaching tight ends and to have Glenn coaching quarterbacks, and part of me is just sitting here thinking, I wonder how much he actually wanted to coach quarterbacks last year. Does that ever cross your mind? It didn't seem like he enjoyed it all that much.
Well, it was tough to enjoy, I think, in those circumstances. And I mean the circumstances that unfolded as the year went along, not the circumstances that he faced. I think it maybe would be interesting to compare how he sounds right now versus what he sounded like a year ago at this time when Nebraska was getting ready to open camp and didn't have any good reason to know that it was going to turn the ball over 31 times. So when you got into, you remember the Satterfield from October, November, and he was beaten down at that point because he'd just been through, everybody on the offense had just been through so much. And I mean, it's got to be like a coordinator's worst nightmare, one of their worst nightmares, to have to change your offense in the middle of a season. If you have to do it in the spring because of personnel issues or whatever, okay, but not after 2 games of a season. Say, all right, we're changing quarterbacks and we're going to change the whole way we go about running this system. So you got to remember what he sounded like, I think, in early August last year. And I think he was pretty energized and excited at that time to coach the quarterbacks.
So where would you put this ability to reflect and kind of their whole self-awareness and how they're consistent with the managing emotion messages? Is it the first close game they win? What kind of barometer do you think you'll get knowing that, okay, this is the practical application of all the descriptions and examples that they've given over the past offseason?
I think that there's a lot riding on how's it gonna look after they win a close game, or you could flip it and say, what's it gonna look like they lose a close game? I mean, the season's not over if they lose a close game somewhere in the first month, and how they react to that, I think, is going to say just as much as what we're hearing right now. I mean, this is all. And this is all very real. Everything that we're hearing from the team, the confidence, the leadership that we see. I was struck on Tuesday as the players met with us in the media, and it was just one guy after another who's a strong leader on this team. There were 12 out there on Tuesday, and there were some who we didn't hear from, and then there were the 3 that we heard from in Indianapolis, and they all have some version of the it factor. I don't think that in recent years, Nebraska's been that deep with its leadership. They can go 15, 16, 17 players strong that I think you can turn to in a moment and say, okay, you're up. It's your time to get it done. And you can expect that they're going to produce. So that's all very real. What we're hearing from these guys right now. This is not being done with trick shots and mirrors, but when it all kind of hits the fan in September or October or November, whenever that moment arrives, how they react to that as a team, I think, is when we're going to really know the direction this season's headed.
Yeah, Mitch, it's interesting you bring up the depth of leadership, right? Because we've heard the coaches talk about how deep the team is, and I always assume we're talking about depth chart, right? In terms of, you can go, we heard Ben Scott tell us, our 2 deep on the offensive line is incredible. And we heard Ty Robinson tell us, I think we got 8 to 10 guys we can play on that defensive line. And so that's where my head always goes. But then I also remember that when we talked to Coach Rhule last week, he goes, yeah, I could have brought 10 different guys here from our defense.
Yeah, he said this was the most difficult year he had in picking who to come to media days.
Yeah, I had a conversation in the middle of the summer with Keith Mann about, hey, who are you taking to Indianapolis? And it was well, we could go with this guy or this guy or this guy. And you just kind of have to, I think the reason they went with the 3 that they did, and you could have added Bryce Benhart to that group, is because he wanted to reward the players that he viewed had an opportunity to go to the next level and then chose to come back. That's not the case with all of the leaders on the Nebraska team. Like, I mean, take Ramir Johnson coming off of an injury. I mean, like the clear best case scenario for him was to come back. It doesn't take away from his ability to be a leader or someone who would have been a great candidate to take to Indianapolis and put on the stage for everybody at media days, or Jamari Butler. Like, great leader, great story. But it was the best thing for him to do, to come back and play another year and put 12, 13 games, 14 games, whatever, more on film. The ones who went to Indy, Gifford, Robinson, Scott, like those guys were in positions where I think they'd be in training camps right now, no, unquestionably. And they chose to come back. And I heard Isaac kind of give his explanation for that, for why he wanted to come back in the Chasing 3, the latest one that came out on Tuesday night, and that was really interesting. I'd say go check that out, people.
He,
if you
he
haven't
pulled
heard
the
that.
punches. Leadership definitely mattered, didn't it?
Yeah, and like the specifics of his situation and what it was about his past and his family that made him say, no, the time is not now. Like, I have something I still need to do in Nebraska.
It seems like Coach Rhule has this uncanny ability to reward the things that he cares about most within his football team. So you mentioned the kind of the loyalty of guys coming back that had opportunities to go play professional football, and that you probably wouldn't disparage for going to go play professional football, but they were loyal. So he wants to reward them with getting some spotlight in Indy, or, guys like Jamari Butler or Tommy Hill getting featured on the Chasing 3, or even as all these guys hit their weight goals or their macros or whatever. Like, how much does that matter, do you think, within the building of the culture of constantly rewarding these things that you want your team to be about?
I mean, it's like reinforcing positivity. You have to find a way to do that. I think 12 months out of the year, it can't just be, hey, we won a road game, so like we're going to eat a great meal after the game, or we're going to have steak, on Sunday night at the facility or whatever. Like, those are all nice things, but like it has to happen. They ask these players to invest all year. So whatever the way is that they reward successes, small wins, wins don't always happen on the field. It can happen in the, whatever, in the training table, because the guy's eating right. And like all of those things should be celebrated. And I think that's like a core belief in Matt Rhule's program.
The more you know, surprised. That's the way that it should be. When you kind of parse through the interviewing process and how integral the sit downs and the autonomy that Coach White had with Coach Butler.
Yeah, that was an interesting storyline to unfold, and I think it was
fascinating.
Yeah, Rhule talked about Tony, and these coaches don't get a lot of time off. I remember going in and talking to Tony White in February as they were in the lead up to spring practice, and we sat down in the football offices, and I made the mistake of asking him a question about just kind of like a small talk, like as we're sitting down, hey, have you had a little bit of time to relax? And he was like offended by almost by that question. Like, I'm not relaxing, man. Like, we got work to do. This is an important time of year. Like, I'm thinking, oh, okay, recruiting just got done. Like, there's nothing going on so much for you guys to do with coaching. And he's like, no, we're busy. We're scouting, this and that. Well, the only time of year where he does get to relax is for a couple weeks in July. And it's important for the coaches to unplug in that time, get away. And that was when this Butler thing happened, right in that time where he's got his one little break in the season. And he put down what he was doing on vacation and looked at candidates and talked with Butler. And I think in a lot of cases, if you're hiring a secondary coach, this is maybe overlooked because we just have maybe come to expect this with Matt Rhule. But if you're hiring a secondary coach as a head coach, How much influence does a normal head coach or a head coach in a normal situation, especially if it's July, let the defensive coordinator have in that decision? And it sounded like Matt Rhule really, really leaned on Tony White, his help and his input in that spot. And it just tells you, like, Tony White is the defensive coordinator of this team, but like maybe a better description for what he is he's the head coach of the defense.
Yeah, and he knows the most. So to concede
makes sense.
Well, kind of, but
it's hard.
A lot of times we don't do that in positions of leadership.
Hard to let go of the wheel.
It's like, well, I know you know more than me, but do you know what I like?
Well, the head coach is the one whose head is on the line. Like he's got the accountability. And if you hire someone who turns out to be the wrong fit, it's not on the DC. It's on the head coach. So that's, I think, why you see people, and you know, there's like an egotistical factor or whatever. But that's why I think in most cases, if a position coach is being hired, like, yeah, the coordinator might like get the final whatever, you're going to get to talk to this guy before we make it official. Fine. But like being involved deeply in the process, it's not always the case.
We're talking with Mitch Sherman of The Athletic. Mitch, I wanted to switch gears here to a piece that you just put out. You know, if you could start putting these out like a couple hours earlier so I could read them before we talk to you.
We usually do. Yeah. We're usually posted by 5, 6 in the morning. Sorry. This one went up at 8 o'clock today just because it's
Mitch.
Yeah.
No, all good. There's a lot about Dylan Raiola in there. I'm sure a lot of people will be interested to read that. But what were some of the takeaways from your story? I mean, the headline is, you know, this guy's obsessed with being really, really, really good. I know you get into some of the coaching input he's had from, you know, like quarterback coaching specialists and stuff like that. But what did you take away from that maybe you didn't know before?
Well, I've been thinking about this story and like planning it out in my head since the spring game when Dylan went to the microphone and somebody asked, "What are you going to do next?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to Kansas City to see Bobby." And, you know, I'm like, Bobby Witt, what? What's this guy? Why am I immediately? No, it's Bobby Strope, the trainer who you saw on quarterback last year with Patrick Mahomes, and he puts Mahomes through all of these like crazy flexibility exercises. I don't know. He hangs upside down and does weird stuff, but obviously it works. And, you know, we know the quarterback who Dylan Raiola like patterns himself after and idolizes, wants to be. You can see it in really every aspect of his game and his life. So it's natural that he's going to seek that out. And, you know, he has resources that are not available. We're never available to a normal college quarterback or certainly a freshman quarterback, but because of his dad's connections in the NFL and because of resources that Dylan has through, you know, NIL, he can do things that are different than just about anybody who's come into this position before him. I mean, think about like Tommy Frazier, the greatest quarterback in Nebraska history, and 30 years ago, as he started his career, like what he had at his disposal. Like, yeah, great situation, like great player out of high school, similar to what Dylan Raiola is, but like he wasn't flying around the country to go meet with like NFL coaches. He wasn't like taking his receivers on a trip to Texas, or, you know, certainly I don't think he was taking the offensive line out for pizza and footing the bill. So it's just a different world that Dylan lives in, and he can kind of act like an NFL quarterback. And I think that's like the fact that he spent much of his life around NFL quarterbacks, like it should not be lost in this discussion. Like he's watched what those players did and the way that they acted and the way that they interacted with their teammates and sought help outside of the facility, and he's with his dad's help has patterned himself in that way. So that's kind of what I went into the story wanting to examine. And then, you know, the final touches yesterday we're talking to some of his teammates about how they viewed him. And I think that's a big thing that could get lost too. Like you could do all of this stuff and you still might not be able to connect with your team. But there's been an emphasis on his part also in fitting in. It would have been easy for him not to fit in because he was by far the most high profile player coming into the program. Like, you know, I asked Teddy Prohaska, like when Dylan committed to Nebraska and signed with Nebraska, and like all of the conversation was about him. How did that sit in the locker room? Like, did you guys kind of look at this and go, all right, you know, this guy's going to have to earn his stripes? And he said it was never really too much of a concern because we knew him from the various recruiting visits that he'd made to campus. And then as soon as he got here, there was a humility about him where he wanted to do whatever he had to do to fit in. And he understood, kind of where his place was, and that if he was going to be a leader, it was going to have to be earned over time.
Man, Mitch, you took the question right out of my mouth, because I was just going to ask, with the amount of attention that he got, it would have been really, really easy for any amount of, I don't know if resentment's too strong of a word, but it's really easy within a locker room where it's like, hey, we've been putting in this work. This guy just showed up here and he's all anybody cares about. That can, especially 18, 22 years old.
I just think I go back to what we talked about, though. They got the temperament in the quarterback room right.
Yeah.
And it matches I'm telling you.
Which is, I think, I think one of the quotes in your story talks about how, and I can't remember who it's from because I was trying to just go through it real fast, but I think one of the quotes was about how Dylan's personality matches Donnie's, and that's not something I would have expected, that this kind of, almost, I don't know if grumbly's the right word, O-line coach is the same mentality as this super highly touted 5-star freshman. Did that kind of catch you off guard at all?
Well, I mean, I don't think that's the Donovan that they're talking about here.
Sure.
They're not talking about the guy. And look, it's his the picture that he presents in front of the public is different now than it was 2 years ago when he was in his first season at Nebraska and he was a first-time assistant coach. Really been put in those positions before. We started to see more of his personality as in part because I think Matt Rhule empowers his guys to be able to do that. And then two, because he's just gotten more comfortable in that role. He's always been the same guy, behind the closed doors with his linemen. And well, first of all, he's extremely fiery at practice. You walk out there, you better have your earplugs in, or I hope you're not planning on like a live video of Donovan Raiola at practice would not be good. I mean, it'd be good if you want to know what's really going on, but it wouldn't be good to put on your show. But you get even deeper with him. And not that I've seen this, but the linemen talk about it. You get behind closed doors, and Teddy Prohaska was the one who was talking about that quote you referenced about their personalities. And he said, we go over to Donnie's house, whatever, for a meal, and you see the real guy, and or at least the real guy in that situation. And I think that's what he means when he says that their personalities are similar. I don't see in Dylan necessarily the fiery side of Donovan that we've seen at practice. Now, as his career gets going and he gets out there and he matures and gets older in this program, you'll probably see some of that come out. But I've not seen that to date in Dylan.
I remember this was probably, and you can speak to this post article because you know so much, but I was speculating in April and May. I said, the D-line modeled what they wanted their room to look like after the O-line room. After the O-line, they watched them work together, share, raise the floor, have each other's back, tuck their shirts in, kind of look the same. And I told Ravi, it seems like and I use Kalen's ability to continue to compete, say all the right things, champion the cause. Harburg being unselfish, never skipped a beat, still says all the right things. And then with Raiola's charisma and people wanting to be around him, I felt like it was important. I said, when your O-line room, that room is good, and the mentality in your quarterback room is right, so many other things go better for your football team in general. And it just seems like the mentality in the quarterback room is right.
Yeah. I mean, it looks that way right now. And I think they found a coach who can devote the right amount of time to massaging that. There's going to be hurt feelings at some point.
There's going to be poor performances.
Right. They're not going to Dylan or whoever is out there is not going to, there are going to be some turnovers. We've made this big emphasis about how they can't turn the ball over. It's going to happen. Defenses are going to make plays. And we'll see. Much like we talked about earlier with I want to see how this team reacts in a tough spot, in a close game, after a close game, whether it's a win or a loss. I want to see how this quarterback group reacts when, when the public is questioning why a decision was made or whatever it might be. And I think they're set up to succeed in that spot because of what you talked about with the temperament and the mix of personalities. But it's all got to play out in front of us before we kind of can put the final verdict on that.
All right, Mitch, real quick here. Got about a minute left. We were having this discussion yesterday about best quarterbacks in Nebraska history. We gave Tommy Frazier, Turner Gill, Eric Crouch, and Jerry Tagge as the top 4. Do you have a candidate for 5?
Okay. Well, I'm just going to say Adrian Martinez. That's a start. Steve Taylor's in that discussion. I say Martinez from the standpoint of just sheer talent. His situation was difficult. And if you're basing this on what a quarterback is most often just wins, then he's not going to get that spot. But the 4 years that he started at Nebraska, his talent and just ability to make plays was undeniable. I'd also look at Taylor Martinez. He had a just crazy talent himself, not as well-rounded as Adrian. It was more just an athlete out there playing QB. So if I'm basing it on success and the ability to win, Steve Taylor, you put Scott Frost in that conversation. And if it's just sheer talent, Adrian.
That's Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. I appreciate you letting me put you on the spot like that. Mitch, we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mitch.